Subscribe to our YouTube channel and press the bell icon to get the latest updates.
Were you surprised that India was on that list?
No, because we know the record of your old democracy. We know we know that. That's why one of the reasons why Netanyahu and Modi became such a good buddies.
I'm with Yossi Melman, a senior intelligence analyst in Israel, in Tel Aviv. Yossi has been a part of the special forces of the Israeli Defense Forces in the 1970s, since written several books on Israel's intelligence community, on nuclear issues and security and terrorism, and also been very much part of on writing on and scripting movies on the Mossad, which as we all know is Israel's external intelligence agencies, and Omer Benjakob, who is the cyber and tech editor of Haaretz, one of Israel's biggest newspapers. Gentlemen, welcome to the Print Debates.
Hello.
Thank you.
So today we are talking, of course, about Pegasus, the Pegasus software, which has created news all over the world, especially in India. And India is one of several countries in which the Pegasus software has been found infected in the phones of several people, politicians, journalists, academics, and including the Congress leader Rahul Gandhi, several other journalists in India. Internationally, we know that the French President Emmanuel Macron's phone has been infected. The princesses of the Dubai ruler, Princess Haya and Princess Latifa, and perhaps you don't know, but Princess Latifa has an Indian connection, because when she was trying to escape from her country, it was the Indian security forces who put her back in her boat and sent her back to the UAE. But the question to you, both of you gentlemen, is about Pegasus. This is an Israeli company. So can I ask you, Mr. Melman, to go first? Tell us a little bit about Pegasus, why Israel, which has this formidable reputation of being a startup nation, especially in this sort of a cyber tech area. What's happening now?
Well, the Pegasus is actually a tool. It's the name of a tool which has been created by an Israeli company, NSO, maybe to remind the customers that it's close to the American NSA, to create that impression. It's basically a very aggressive virus or spyware, which can penetrate telephones and suck all the information which is in the telephone, in the smartphone, and it is the tool is what we call a no-click. So basically, even if you don't open anything, still you can be affected. And this has been a very, very sophisticated, innovative tool. And the company, with the Israeli Ministry of Defense approval and with the encouragement of the Israeli government and its security services, including the Mossad, have been selling that tool to many, many countries around the world, including India. And each country, each security service of the country, each police force of the respective countries decided who should be targeted.
Mm-hmm. So when you say that every intelligence agency of every country decided who should be targeted, what is that? What do you mean by that?
The tool, the spyware, is sold by the company, by NSO, to local police forces and security services. It's not a G2G, government-to-government deal. Okay. It has to be approved by the Ministry of Defense, but the actual deal is with the police forces and security services of the various countries which decided to buy the product.
Now, so if NSO sells, say, to the police services of India, the government of India must know what's going on, right? They must know that such a sale is taking place because it's with a foreign company, right?
Well, the government of India surely knows that its police forces or its security services purchased this tool, and both sides, NSO knows what the tool is capable of doing. It is promoting the tool as the most advantaged spyware in the world. And on the other hand, the government of, let's say, India in this case, but there are other governments, also knows what are its capabilities, what it can do with the tool. But it's up to the government of India, up to the police forces of India and its security services to decide that they want to target this human rights activist or this journalist or that politician.
Right. Omer, can I ask you to come in here and tell us, first of all, Israel's reputation of being a startup nation. Now, how does something like NSO, which is a cyber company, sell spyware like this across the world? Does the Israeli government know what's going on?
So yes, I think a lot of misconception about this story from abroad is that this is, a private enterprise that is somehow spying or helping other, foreign nations spy on their citizens. I think this is very much, obviously, NSO is a private company. I don't think they're a front at any level for the Israeli government, but I think they do operate in a field of offensive cyber, which the Israeli government is actively promoting and actively pushing out, as in a very similar way that countries have always used military or certain types of industries to advance their diplomatic goals. And I think in that sense, it's not necessarily different than the way America has supported certain military struggles at the expense of others. So Israel, with the help of its kind of offensive cyber industry, is forging diplomatic ties. And I think the case of India is very interesting in this case, because it's not a question of whether the Indian government knows or not. It's just not feasible that this deal took place without it, at some level being put together by the Israeli and Indian government. So just in terms of the timeline, the first time we see targets in India within the kind of leak that we saw is the exact same month, the exact same month that Netanyahu visits, that Modi visits Israel, Mm-hmm. So we're seeing a visit in July 2017, and that's the time the first targets start showing up. So it's very clear that there is at some level connection. Obviously, also at the oversight level, there has to be a connection. Israel, is a very defense-oriented country. We would never sell technology that could be dangerous to a country that we don't want them to have this technology, because, as an Israeli, you can't just sell technology to whoever you want. It's not this type of technology. So even at the oversight level...
Let me just ask you there, what do you mean when you say that you can't sell the technology to whoever you want? Yossi, can you throw some...
Yeah, I already explained. Every deal, every military deal, be it hardware, software, cyber, or missiles, or tanks, or airplanes, which originates in Israel, has to be approved by the Ministry of Defense, not only once, but 3 times. There are 3 layers of licensing by the Israeli Ministry of Defense. The first one is when you enter negotiations. You have to report to the government. The government can say, no, we don't allow you to enter negotiations with this or that country or this or that police force. Then you have the second phase, which is the concluding the deal, concluding the negotiations, completing the negotiation. Once again, it has to be approved by the government. And then you have the third stage, and this is that you deliver. So the Israeli Ministry of Defense is fully aware, is approving as behind every hardware, every equipment which is sold by Israel, military equipment, espionage equipment, services to foreign countries or foreign bodies, foreign organizations. So the Israeli government is behind it, and in many, many cases, the government and its security services are encouraging these sales, as Omer said, in order to enhance diplomatic ties or other political or diplomatic strategies.
Mm-hmm. It's very important to understand that this is not actually a technological story. A lot of people think this has to do with technology and iPhones. It's not. It's an arms sales story. In the sense, it's not different, the dynamics here involved, than any other international military arms sale. So it's true it's a private company, but Boeing, in a sense, you could say is also a private company. And Lockheed Martin, you could also say they're a private company. But it's not at that level. And we know Haaretz, before Project Pegasus, has reported that Israel is actively, for example, the United Arab Emirates and Saudi Arabia became clients of NSO because the Israeli government encouraged this. And how do we know this? Because no Israeli can travel to these countries. You're not allowed to go, let alone to travel with, know-how that might have some security ramifications. These people aren't selling, iPhone headphones to the United Emirates. And on the other hand, we know that to Qatar, they weren't allowed to sell specifically NSO's targets. So obviously, someone is regulating this. And it says we need to think about it the same way you think about arms sales.
Yeah, so, something else that you said was very interesting, Omer, is that when Prime Minister Modi travels to Israel in mid-2017, when Benjamin Netanyahu was then Prime Minister of Israel. Now, the first sale, according to your information, or according to the data dump that Forbidden Stories got, which is this international non-profit in France. Now, according to this dump, the first, the so-called sort of potential targets in India, the potential selected targets were took place in that month. That was the first instance of that. So can you make this connection between the visit of Prime Minister Modi meeting his, and they were very close friends.
Yeah, so Amitai Ziv, the reporter from Haaretz, who participated in the Project Pegasus investigation that I was just editing and helping him a bit, what he actually showed is that India is not the only place this happened with. And generally, we see what he calls kind of cyber diplomacy. So we see a very clear kind of timeline. So it's not causality, but it certainly is correlation. So we're never seeing NSO targets in countries before Netanyahu visits these countries. So at that, I can say just at a factual level, we don't see any place that has active NSO targets if Netanyahu didn't visit it. I mean, among the non-Western kind of countries. But more specifically, if you look at places like Hungary, this is the same thing, So Hungary, I have to look at the dates for a second, but July 2018, he visits there. February, we have the first targets, So you see this kind of dynamic. Azerbaijan, a year after they kind of, visit. So you see this kind of now 2 years, after Netanyahu visits, we see the first target. So it's not always a weekly correlation, but what we are seeing, and I think this is interesting, is that the first targets are being even if you accept NSO's narrative, right? Let's say this leak is completely false. Mm-hmm. It's just some test or some demo. Even that, the correlation becomes even more interesting because it means that Israel is actually in a sense helping just showcase the technology. Yeah. You know what I mean? Even at that level, it's just the fact that this is the showcase indicates a lot, I think. So it's not causality, but it certainly is a very strong correlation. Again, also very important. Project Pegasus is not the first time NSO is being reported about. Haaretz has reported about tons of this stuff. Guardian has reported about tons of this stuff. Citizen Lab. So a lot of this stuff is we're just confirming what we already know. So we already know that Israel was actively selling this out, in Rwanda, for example. That part of the deal for Rwanda to take in Israeli asylum seekers, African asylum seekers living in Israel, was this NSO. So this stuff has already been reported. Morocco.
Sure. So Yossi, can I ask you, what does this do? The fact that this is an Israeli company, what does this do to Israel's image? I mean, you guys are, you call yourselves a democratic nation. I mean, so is India, but we won't go there right now. But, what does this do to Israel's self-image?
Well, let me just make something clear. It's a simple story. It's a story between friendly nations or less friendly nations which are interested in promoting mutual interest. Now, it scratched my back, I'll scratch yours. In other words, Modi, let's imagine that Modi comes to Israel and Netanyahu, our prime minister, asks him, what I can do for you? And he says, oh, we have a wonderful technology called Pegasus. We can offer it to you. And Modi says, perfect, we need it. And then Modi asks Netanyahu, and what would you like from me? What would you like from me? And Netanyahu says, I don't know, to kill Muslim terrorists in Kashmir. Okay, it's just out of my imagination.
I don't think he said that.
This story is out of my imagination. I'm drafting this story.
No, he probably said as long as you keep buying other military gear from Israel.
So you see, it's a simple story. Now, it was reported in the Israeli media before, maybe not in so many details, but it was reported. Now, the Israeli philosophy is sell as much as you can. It's part of it supports our military, to be at the front lines of technological, scientific advance. We need it for our military, but also we need to export, so it supports the economy. It gives employment to many, many Israelis, and that's how it works. Now, when there is a scandal, suddenly the Ministry of Defense is saying, oh, that's terrible, what happened, we will investigate, but they knew it before, they approved it, and it gives Israel a bad name. The image of Israel is terrible, but at the same time, the Moroccan Macron called, French President Macron called our defense minister and our prime minister and complained. He didn't complain about the Moroccan king or the security services of Morocco. They used the tool. Israel was just an instrument in it. Why? Because Israel has such a bad name that every story can stick to Israel. Every bad story sticks to Israel because we have been known of selling armaments left and right to dictators, to unscrupulous leaders, without adding any value in our foreign policy, morality and value in our foreign policy. It just interest, and I wonder what are the national interests of Israel, if not also to be a free democratic society which honors not only our human rights, but also other nations' human rights.
I would just add to that very small aspect that I think is very interesting. When you look who the clients are, the potential clients, it's very interesting to see who are not on the list, right? And I think if you look who's not on this list, Russia, America, my assumption is that they don't need NSO to do this. They can do this on their own. The same way in Israel, NSO doesn't need to work here. Like our security services can do this stuff. So I think in that sense, Yossi is very, very right that we're giving an edge to countries that don't necessarily have it, but it's not that we're doing something or something that other people aren't doing, Every state secret service in the world does something like this. I think NSO is just a privatized version that allows countries that Israel wants to sell to and forge ties with enjoy a technology they can develop themselves.
Yeah, so the difference is that, the Pegasus spyware was not found on the phones of people in, like you said, in Israel or the US or Russia.
Because they're already listening in on us. And I'm sure Putin's secret service doesn't know. I'm serious. I'm completely serious. I think that it's very important to make this point. The Pegasus software is a private solution to something that I think most intel services in the world already do. Yeah. So the reason there's no American numbers is not because no one is interested in this in America. It's because the NSA, and we know this from Snowden, can do it on their own. And in Russia, I'm sure the same thing is true. If they couldn't, maybe they'd want to buy it, and maybe we would or wouldn't want to sell it to them. We probably would want to sell it to them. But I'm saying a lot of times that's kind of the logic here. And I think that it's not. In that sense, it's very much privatized military service.
But tell me something, in Israel, the Israel Defense Ministry has now paid a visit within quotes to the NSO offices, right, in Tel Aviv. Now, what is the present Prime Minister's government, Prime Minister Naftali Bennett's government, what do they have to say about the fact that his predecessor, under his watch, or maybe, we don't know whether Netanyahu knew about it or not, but during that period, this Pegasus software was sold to all kinds of regimes in the world. I mean, India is a democracy and we are very proud to be one, but hey, we are buying your software.
Well, my point is it has nothing to do with Netanyahu because it started before Netanyahu. That's my point. Israel has been doing it for generations, selling, even before Pegasus or iTech was invented, we were selling missile, tanks, airplanes. Pegasus is a weapon. So we have been selling weapons and arming dictators and dubious regimes for generations. And now we don't need to use missiles because you have such aggressive tools which can do the work for you. Now when it was revealed, it's always, the name of the game is don't be caught. Once you are caught, you are highly embarrassed and you come up with the justifications, explanations, and that's what the Israeli government is doing. It's trying to manage the crisis and going to tell the French and I assume other nations, look, we just sold it. In the contract, we stipulate that you can't misuse it. You have to use it only for the war against terrorism and criminals. And I would believe that let's say the Mexican police would say, Oh yes, we use it against terrorists because that journalist who was killed, he was a terrorist. You see, it's a question of how nations define terrorism, how they target people, and so on. It's a very simple story. However, bad for Israel, it was revealed now. Will they change now their modes of operations? Will they change now their philosophy? I doubt it very much. Israel will be just only more careful this time.
Exactly. I agree 100% because the origin of this whole story, the origin of this very simple story that Yossi is very accurately portraying here is that as long as Israel doesn't want to change its, geopolitical situation, until Israel doesn't want to make peace, want to end the occupation, strive proactively for a two-state solution, as long as Israel finds itself in a diplomatic bind, it will always be incentivized to, find another currency to function at the diplomatic level. And arms will always be a good option. So as long as Israel's not actually making peace or striving towards peace, selling arms will always be a great solution. I don't think there's any difference between this government and the previous one in that regard.
No, but listen, nations will sell arms to each other. And as Yossi said, this has been done since time immemorial, right? I mean, to turn a phrase. But Omer, the question is, there is a new government in town. And I would imagine that the new government would like to excavate or at least inquire into what happened under the watch of the previous government. So has your current Prime Minister, Mr. Bennett, is he taking this up or not? And do you know if there's been any conversation between India and Israel on this?
No, that I don't know for sure, but I think there's a great scene in Casablanca in which, they come up to Captain Renault and they say, there's gambling going on. He goes, I'm shocked there's gambling in this establishment, and then they give him his winnings. So I think, maybe the new government is now learning what the previous government did, and maybe they are investigating, but it's very important to understand there is no logic, there's no world in which someone exported this without the professional defense establishment giving its okay. And the professional defense establishment has not changed. So even if they're now looking to it and they're going to NSO's office and they're saying, maybe they're having a very pragmatic discussion, telling them things like we can't get caught anymore, or we need to be safer, or maybe we need to rethink the strategy. It's still being spoken about in a very pragmatic, I think, level. I don't think anyone is going to unearth anything. There was an interesting report that came out on NPR yesterday. Daniel Estrin, I think, confirmed this, that NSO have now kind of started closing some of the governments because they don't, to kind of investigate. Yeah. We're closing accounts. And I want to give a different perspective on this kind of news. I think it's very likely that NSO is very angry at the Israeli government, that NSO doesn't actually want to sell to governments like Saudi Arabia and UAE. They probably do want to sell to India, but like in their best case scenario, they sell to really wealthy police forces in the UK and in America. They don't want these kind of clients because these clients get journalists like us very interested in them, and then we write big exposés about them, and then they can't go public. NSO wants to be a tech company. They want to go public. They want the money. They're worth around $2.5 billion. They can't do this now. So I think NSO is also kind of stuck between the government and, what they actually want to be.
Right. So Yossi, on your Twitter feed, I was looking at of course you had a comment in Hebrew and, I translated it on Twitter, but you were referring to the Democratic politicians in the US who basically put out a statement on the Pegasus software, on the spyware, and said enough is enough. And that was what the Americans were saying. But you seem to be quite agitated about that as well.
Well, I think now they realize, the government, as I said before, the Israeli government realizes that there is a crisis and they have to manage the crisis. And maybe they'll redefine the rules of the game and the contracts, and they will put more breaks and stipulates and clauses in the contracts that they offered and the deals that they may make with the government. I'm sure they will be much more careful. The government will be more, preoccupied with how to conduct this kind of deals. But the basic attitude of the Israeli government, as long as it, or the security establishment, as long as it is not changed, it will be more or less more of the same. And my argument is that Israel needs to insert some other consideration in formulating its foreign policy, in devising its foreign policy. It's not on security is a broad issue. It's a broad definition. Morality, human rights, values, democratic values should be part of the consideration, which is devising our policy, our foreign policy, our security politics.
Right. So what happens now, gentlemen? Omer, can I ask you to go first on this?
I think that's a very good question. I think we're going to see now a lot of this very kind of classic, state posturing, like we're going to investigate this, and hopefully it dies down. For me, the most interesting kind of axis in the story that's playing out is actually Israel and France, because if Macron is, calling out the Israeli establishment, it's not based on an amnesty report and a journalist report. It's based on real forensics analysis that they have done in-house. So I think that the French, because they're pissed off that Israel sold this technology to the Moroccan Intel, are going to go all in. And I think the French-Israeli story is very interesting to follow, because I think that's going to be where a lot of the big confirmations come out. I'm going to be super honest with you. I don't think a lot of stuff is going to come out in India, because I think in India, the government is probably the client, and therefore probably the one invested in not investigating at this point. But in theory, it would be very good if more governments across the world would now use their intelligence services to actually look into this stuff and confirm who was targeted. Le Monde yesterday confirmed that a lot of the journalists that were that the Forbidden Stories and the Pegasus investigation said were targeted were actually targeted, because we only had a list of potential targets. Now they're actually confirming it. So that's what I'd hope happens now. But to be honest, I think Israel is going to keep selling big cyber tech. There's tons of other companies, Kandiro, Circles, Quadream. There's so many other companies beyond NSO. So hopefully more investigations as well.
Well, you're absolutely right about India, because the government of India has neither confirmed nor denied. They're not saying anything at all. In fact, they're asking journalists, what's the proof? So, it's up to the journalists to sort of, at least try and provide the proof. But even in Parliament, the parliamentary committee which wants to talk about this, or at least discuss it, even that's not being allowed to be held. But last comments from you, Yossi. How do you see this unfold in the next few days, and how do you think Israel is going to deal with it?
In the next few weeks, there'll be some sort of internal inquiry, which is a contradiction by terms, because if you want to really investigate the story, you need an outside commission. You need independent experts with the involvement of human rights experts and witnesses, and journalists as well. So there'll be some sort of investigation. They'll come up with some conclusion. They'll say we will tighten our supervision of NSO and the tools and other companies. And then a year from now or 2 years from now, they'll come up with a new tool, more advanced one, better technology. And once again, either NSO or some other companies will offer to the Ministry of Defense to sell it for, I don't know, another country which Israel would like to have diplomatic relations with. I don't know, with Algeria. Who knows? I'm just,
But can I ask you?
Or Pakistan. You know what? Imagine that Pakistan will say, we want to be your friends. Help us and we will help you. What the Israeli government will do?
We'll sell for sure. They'll sell them for sure. We'll sell to Pakistan and
Well,
India.
I'm not sure. They will sell it as long as the Indian would not know about it.
Yeah, that's true.
But let me ask you both, were you surprised, Yossi, if you can go first, were you surprised that India was on that list?
No, because we know the record of your old democracy. We know we know that. That's why one of the reasons why Netanyahu and Modi became such a good buddies, because both of them showed the same tendencies of being populist leaders, if not to say more than that. So yes, Netanyahu and Modi try to suppress the media, try to weaken the judiciary system. There is nothing new and on top of that, there have been three decades of very close strategic, nuclear, and military cooperation between India and Israel against the common enemy, which is Pakistan. So if you put it all together, that's the answer. I'm not surprised at all.
Omer?
For sure. No, I agree 100%. I think India, in that sense, is almost the least surprising and most obvious because it's such a big, clear Netanyahu win. I think Yossi said something very intelligent, very important that we should focus on. We tend to think of the world as, East, West, this kind of pro-Israel or anti-Israel, but it's not. It's actually liberal democracies and illiberal and illiberal forces. Netanyahu was at the cutting edge of illiberal democracy. Illiberal democracy is a term that Viktor Orban loves, also an NSO client. We see the exact same tendencies, the same type of illiberal populist tendencies, also with Modi, and also in other places. And this is really kind of what has been connecting all these different countries. So though they might seem not aligned, they're actually connected by a very similar political culture, which is a illiberal democracy that is becoming more and more authoritarian to a certain extent, or increasingly illiberal.
Right, gentlemen, we'll have to leave it there. Yossi Melman and Omer Benjakob, both from Israel. We will be following this story as it unfolds, especially because it's so intimately connected with our own democracy in India. But thank you so much for joining The Print.
Thank you. Stay strong.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.